Sachs argues that this war didn't just happen out of nowhere. In his view, it's the result of years of tension between NATO and Russia, especially NATO's expansion closer and closer to Russia's borders. He doesn't justify the invasion, but he asks an uncomfortable question. If you keep pushing someone to the edge, knowing exactly where their red line is.
Well, I think what's interesting is that the European response in practice is not very different to the 28-point plan. Europe made a number of changes, but in substance, this war is coming to an end soon, and it's going to come to an end on the basis that NATO won't enlarge, Ukraine won't be part of NATO, some land will be recognized de facto as under Russian control, but Ukraine is not going to acknowledge it as Russian. And that's going to be the way that the fighting stops. So I think the truth is we're probably coming close to the end of the fighting.
Why, though, would anyone on the Ukrainian side trust Putin, given that he took Crimea and given he's now taken, say, another 20% of land? We'll see what the final geographical boundary says. But why would anyone on the Ukrainian side trust him not to come back for more?
Well, the way that the agreement is structured is that if one side violates it, it ends all of the guarantees that that side has received. The idea is that this is a mutual or collective security arrangement, and it says that if one side violates it, the other side is free of any further obligations. If indeed an agreement is reached and Russia violates it, I think the full force of whatever the West would bring to this would immediately return. So this is the basis of all peace agreements in human history.
If you keep pushing someone to the edge, knowing exactly where their red line is, what do you expect will happen? According to Sachs, peaceful solutions were possible much earlier, but for some political circles, peace was never the priority, because war means power, war means money, war means control, and the ordinary people, they always pay the price. He also says that this war will eventually end in a compromise anyway, not perfect for anyone. So the real question becomes, if compromise was always the ending, why did millions have to suffer first?
Which is that both sides are exhausted. There is a tacit understanding, let's stop. There's some appreciation of what the causes for the fighting were in the first place, and they're somewhat imperfectly accommodated. And that's where we are. I think that this is the same here. This war was because there was a contest between NATO and Russia over Ukraine. That contest, in my view, as we've discussed many times, should have been avoided all along. There is such thing that neither the US and Britain don't like and don't agree on. That's called neutrality. But in any event, that was what was rejected by the United States 30 years ago. Russia said, don't do that. The US said, we don't listen to you. And in any event, the fighting took place. Now the war is going to end. Ukraine is not going to be part of NATO, and that's what's going to enable the war to end. We're just going to basically call it a day, and now the arguments are over the details. But everybody's exhausted. Ukraine's losing on the battlefield. Europe doesn't really have anything to offer in this except words of leaders who have no standing in their own country anyway. They're all very unpopular, Starmer, Merz, Macron. So they don't bring anything to the table anyway. And the United States does not want to fight on for a principle which the U.S. started actually 30 years ago, that NATO will go wherever it wants, and it's not interested in fighting over that. And I agree with the United States on that. Why fight over that?
You and I, we've talked about this a lot, and I've always valued our conversations about it. I feel I've learned a lot. I don't necessarily agree with everything you've said, but I've learned a lot, particularly about the history. And I can certainly, I can accept that Russia and Putin feel like there was unnecessary provocation from NATO, unnecessary encroachment, and so on. I can see that argument. But that doesn't necessarily change, does it? The fact that in the end, in 2022, he illegally invaded a sovereign democratic country. I mean, you can argue about why he did it and the reasons for it and the build-up and the logic and so on. But I mean, we should be able to agree that the actual act that was committed when he invaded was an illegal invasion of a sovereign country, can't we?
Yeah, but there were several illegal acts all along the way. There was a US-backed coup in February 2014, and there was an actual war with about 14,000 deaths that Ukraine was waging on the breakaway regions of eastern Ukraine. So the war started in 2014. Whenever you have something like this, there's no start date. This is a game of narrative to choose one's start date. This is two sides going back more than 30 years contesting whether Ukraine should be neutral, whether it should be part of NATO, whether it should be part of Russia. And it led to war because what was the basic answer, which was neither side gets Ukraine, Ukraine gets Ukraine, was the right answer. But actually, when the U.S. had the upper hand, it couldn't accept that answer. It said, we have the upper hand, we can push that it's ours, not Russia's. That was the whole idea.
You don't have to agree with Jeffrey Sachs, but his words shouldn't be ignored either. He's not talking like a politician or a propagandist. He's talking like someone who has been inside the system long enough to understand how decisions are actually made behind closed doors. The real question isn't who is right. The real question is, why are we only allowed to hear one side of the story? And are we just watching all this, or are we silently part of it?